The Japanese collections at the V&A have grown up over a very long period and are very substantial. The fact that we have so many objects is a reflection of the very great interest in Japan there has been from the middle of the 19th century onwards. So the history of collecting Japan at the V&A dates right back to its origins. The Japanese collection at the V&A comprises perhaps 50,000 objects altogether. And of course, one could never show more than a small part of it. But since 1986, we've been extremely fortunate in having a gallery which is sponsored by the Toshiba Corporation and therefore called the Toshiba Gallery of Japanese Art, which allows us to show some of our, a range of objects from our collection and many of the great highlights.
Well, as you probably know, the V&A is particularly famed for its collections of textiles and dress, and that's certainly the case for Japan as well as for other parts of the world. And we have a wide range of textiles. We're most famous for having the wonderful collection of kimono, that sort of iconic garment of Japan. So this kimono commemorates the first flight from Japan to Europe. It was a Japanese-built plane built by Mitsubishi, and it set off on the 6th of April 1937, and it landed 3 days later on the 9th of April at Croydon Airport. And the kimono shows the plane itself, and it shows the route the plane took, but it also shows in roundels, it shows the symbols of the two countries, if you like, of Japan and Britain. It shows Mount Fuji and Tower Bridge. And it would have been worn, as I say, by a young boy. And it's the idea of sort of wrapping a child in imagery like this. It was suggesting that you hoped your child would grow up to be brave and heroic and courageous, just like the pilot himself. And to, as I say, to have a garment that actually has images of Japan and images of Britain, it just seemed the perfect garment to display in a British museum, in a Japanese gallery.
The samurai were the ruling military class of Japan who came to power at the end of the 12th century. The Japanese had great reverence for the sword. Later on in the peaceful Edo period, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun, referred to the Japanese sword as being the soul of the samurai. The blade of this sword was made by a man named Morimitsu, who came from Bizen province, which is in the west of Japan, the modern-day Okayama prefecture. And it was probably made around 1400 to 1420. The scabbard is much later, because in Japan, the blade is the most important part of a sword, and a blade can be remounted in different styles at different times to suit different occasions. And so from being a blade made in the early 1400s for fighting, it was then remounted probably in the second half of the 18th century, around 1750 or 1800, as a ceremonial processional sword. Because at that point, Japan was at peace, and yet the country was still being ruled by samurai, but they were harking back to their great military traditions. And of course, high-ranking samurai, and nobody but a high-ranking samurai would own this sword, wanted a piece of Japan's great historical samurai military past.
A big area, of course, that is very well known in the West is Japanese product design. And we have collected from the early 1950s quite a remarkable number of objects there. The courtier is a remarkable design by a design studio based in Tokyo called Nendo under the directorship of Okisato. It was designed in 2009 as a limited edition of only 8 objects. The courtier is only possible by using a steel core in it and cladding this with a very thin maple veneer. I probably love most about it this hidden quality that no one kind of on the first glance that you wouldn't expect, that it's actually a piece of craftsmanship that is here on show. And that is probably something that is quite Japanese, that you wouldn't try to show off is how remarkable you can do certain things.
Covered vessel number 7 is a ceramic vessel by a Japanese artist called Gomi Kenji, Gomi being his surname. And it was made in 2012 and exhibited in New York before coming to the V&A. The vessel is made from earthenware. Well, it's made from clay, quite a highly grolled clay, so it has a very rich texture to it. And it is fired to a fairly low temperature in a strongly reducing atmosphere, which causes the rather ghostly, whitish, blackish colours that you see in it. The walls of the lower part and the upper part are very, very thick. And in fact, as you put the lid onto the base, it makes a rather disturbing, grinding sound, rather like the enclosing of a tomb. And my feeling about this piece is that it's a very numinous object. It does suggest a certain otherworldliness. It's a vessel that is something that may or may not hold something, and therefore it does sort of play on one's imagination.